Hello class, welcome to my Interpersonal Communication Project by Devane Retriege, Studies in Interpersonal Communication, Human Services 508. Next slide. Introduction. What is communication? Identification of an overarching goal. Definition of enlarging the conversation. Description of how your background and behavioral blend have influenced your conversation positively and negatively. Defining the potential barriers in your interpersonal context and how you're going to deal with each one. Identifying and providing solutions to noise pollution both internally and externally. My plan of action. Next slide. Communication. According to Stewart, 2012, in the most general sense, the terms communication and communicating label the continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal meaning making. Next slide. Communication and connecting in relationships. According to Peterson 2007, there are two levels of communication. Level 1, communicating gives and receives information and discusses points of view. Level 2, communicating goes deeper than words. It moves us towards more satisfying relationships. We develop trust, intimacy, and more personal sharing. Next slide. Listening. Empathetic listening is frequently identified as a key communication skill for developing effective collaboration. The goal is to communicate that the listener is doing his or her best to understand the partner's thoughts and feelings, empathy, and that how the speaker is feeling is important to the listener, respect. The listener works to communicate genuine interest, understanding, and acceptance of the speaker's point of view. The goal is not to agree or disagree, but simply to better understand the speaker's perspective. Next slide. Listening, the forgotten skill. According to Burley Allen, 1995, listening is a potent force for reducing stress and tension. True listening builds teamwork, trust, and a sense of belonging to a group. When people know they are talking to a listener instead of someone who sits in judgment, they openly suggest ideas and share thoughts. The listener then has an opportunity to respond to the person's concerns and needs that otherwise might have gone unnoticed. Next slide. My overarching goal: to become a better listener, to become a better nonverbal communicator, to appreciate and utilize nexting as a communication tool. My main goal is to become a level 1 listener. Next slide. Enlarging the conversation. In my opinion, enlarging the conversation means to use all different types of techniques such as empathic listening, nonverbal communication, and nexting, etc., as ways to express oneself in order to have a better communicative experience. Next slide. Background and behavioral blend. After reading Dr. Carbonell's DISC model, behavioral blend refers to the combination that each individual has within their personality. These combinations include 4 types or 4 quadrants that make up the DISC model, which often explains why people do what they do. Next slide. Background and behavioral blend continued. My personality blend for this is expected of me is SD. My personality blend or type for this is me is IDS. When I communicate, I tend to have a more dominant approach. This usually can be a negative method in my communication because I tend to overspeak the other person and not really listen as I should. The positive side to my behavioral blend is that I can be submissive or passive at the same time, which means that depending on what the other person may say, I can show a lot of empathy within the conversation. Next slide. Potential barriers. The main barrier that I face within my interpersonal context is excessive speaking and the lack of listening. Burley Allen states that one major barrier to excessive listening is that in this society we have equated speaking with mastery and power. After reviewing my potential barriers, I have determined that speaking is my main barrier that prevents me from listening effectively. Next slide. External noise pollution. Noise pollution can be both external and internal. Noise pollutions can be anything that prohibits someone from expressing effective listening. External noise pollution can be any disturbance or noise that is perceived by the listener, such as people talking or yelling, cars driving by, dogs barking, or music playing, etc. Next slide. Internal noise pollution. Internal noise pollution can be anything that prevents the listener from exercising effective listening. Internal noise pollution can be the speaker not being clear with their message, the speaker is too soft-spoken or loud, the listener having emotional setbacks such as anger, fear, or even happiness. The solution to noise pollution depends on the situation. Solutions to external noise pollution can be removing yourself from the area of noise. Solutions to internal noise pollution can be determined based on the individual and how well they can listen and deal with any emotional setbacks that prevent them from listening. Next slide. A plan of action. To express more effective listening. By listening more effective without believing it's necessary to speak will allow me to grasp the true potential of the communication process. Speaking when the time is right. Speaking when the time is right will allow me to evaluate the conversation more effectively and respond accordingly. Master the art of nexting. Allowing myself to always realize that I can have a next move or solution no matter how the conversation or situation concludes. Next slide. Visual cues and listening effort. Individual variability. Listening effort can be measured objectively and subjectively. The underlying rationales for the objective measures are that as listening effort increases, more cognitive resources are necessary for a listener to recognize speech. Because these resources must be devoted to speech recognition, there are fewer available for rehearsal or recall of items in a list for responding to a secondary task. Listening effort has been measured objectively by fewer words recalled. Next slide. Bibliography page. References page. Thank you for your time, class. I hope you really enjoyed this presentation.